Good afternoon, everybody. Here we are again. For want of some. Well, I think. Well, I think if you've got Phil Young on, right, the idea to go, "Hey, everybody, it's HOMEGAMES," hey, and then Phil it's just not going to work. So you are all extremely welcome to HOMEGAMES. I hope everybody's having a good week. Our guest is, of course, the magnificently bearded Mr. Phil Young. And it's I was going to say nice, but slightly kind of full of jeopardy and concerning to have Phil here, because you just never know. You never know. He's such a wacky wind-up prankster. You just don't know what he's going to do. So I look forward to 40 minutes of madcap antics and wacky off-the-wall zaniness with Phil. So we're gonna, it'll be good, I think, and I hope you enjoy it. As ever, the chat is open, so please ask lots of questions of Phil. I think probably most of you have been on before, but for those of you that haven't, no subject is out of bounds. If Phil can't answer something, he'll just say, "I can't answer that," and then we'll ask him it again loads of times just to see if he changes his mind. So that's all right. If you want to ask a formal question, there's an ask a question button down the bottom. If you just want to stick it in the chat, I'm watching the chat, but sometimes it's quite hard to see what's going on. Every week, somebody moans that they can't see it or hear it. And I do this every week, which is put a little link into the chat. And if you're having trouble, then if you click on that link, it will tell you to do some things, and then that will sort that element of your problems out. If you are planning to have an outdoor gathering, for example, on Tuesday next week of more than 6 people, I'm afraid it can't do very much for you then. But you could come to Scotland, and we'll happily host your 7-person gatherings for a modest fee. I don't know. T-shirt of the week this week is by special request from Phil. He felt there hadn't been enough power metal represented, so it's Children of Bodom. And of course, those of you that follow it will know that Children of Bodom No More, a radical split when 3 of the founding members fell out very badly with the other 2 and left in December. So Phil, sit down. And that's all a bit tricky now. 3 of them gone doing their own thing. The other ones are called Bodom After Midnight, which I thought was the little coffee thing that you had. But there you go. If you're looking for new Children of Bodom records, you'll find it a bit hard to find them. If you look for Bodom After Midnight, you might find some. What's the matter?
Eating into my time, man. Come on.
All right, start talking.
What do you want to know?
I don't want to know anything. I know you pretty well.
We'll just sit here.
Right.
Nah,
come on. You have been. I first knew you at 360, I think, and I don't know how long it is that you've been providing support services and stuff to advisor firms, but it's quite a long time. So I thought we'll have a wee canter through that. And you can't work with that many firms for that long without seeing some of the stuff that goes on in the sector that we maybe don't talk about at the shinier end of things. And so I thought we might have a little bit of a chat on the old filth front, some of the practices of the past and some things that are still going on. And then we're going to have, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to have to talk about football, because apparently you own a football club now. Phil has heard of a place called Bury. He thought it was Didsbury, but it's not there. And he's bought a football club personally to use as his plaything, I think. So we'll have to talk about that a little bit. And then we'll just see what else is coming. I want lots and lots of questions if you want to chip in, because it saves me thinking things up, which is always a benefit. But let's start. Phil, take us back a little bit. So when did you start working with advisor firms, and what was it like then?
I started working 1996, late 90s. Let me take you back to 1996. England had just won the European Championships, nearly. And I applied for a job. I didn't know what it was going to be. I had no real interest in what the job was going to be or what sector or what industry. I hadn't applied any thought to it at that point in time. And saw a job for a business that did something called compliance. And I thought it was something to do with, I don't know why, but I thought it was something to do with electrical equipment. And I ended up getting the job by sheer fluke as much as anything else, including one of the chaps that's up on there on the message board, Mr. Facer there as well. So we both started work at the same place at the same time. Absolutely hated it. Hated the company that we worked for. Hated the work that we were doing. And I jumped ship to Bankhall around 98, I think it was. Stayed there for a while. Had quite a bit of fun there because it was just complete carnage at the time. It was pretty chaotic. They were growing exponentially. I think they had several thousand firms that we were dealing with at one point in time. Partly because the old IFA promotions that's propped up with the general kicking of unbiased of late. When IFA promotions got told that they had to stop pretending that they were a trade body and bleeding people dry for money or whatever it was that they were doing at the time, and that broke up and folded into Bankhall. So that was all good, and we left, and a bunch of people set up 360. In 2003, we launched that. Sold it to Standard Life in 2010. Stayed on for a while, and then decided to sit on my arse and chat shit with people like you and various other business owners now. So rather than looking after a business with a load of staff that looks after lots of advisors, it's now kind of me on my own, just dealing with a smaller number of firms, but probably a bit of a closer relationship with those that I deal with. And it's a combination of board roles, a couple of businesses that I chair, one non-exec, and the rest of it's kind of board advisory and stuff like that, and anything else that sort of appeals or is of interest to me. So yeah, I've never been an advisor, but I've sort of worked with them for over 20 years now. Seen quite a lot of stuff. What you really want to know is, what's the dumbest question that a financial advisor has ever asked me?
I do want to know that.
The answer is this. The answer is, somebody once rang up, it was many years ago now, but once rang up one of the helplines rather than me direct and said, have you any idea why I sold my mother an offshore bond? Thank you very much. That's still one of the best that I've ever heard. Someone ring up and ask a question. Have we travelled better, to a better place since then? Probably not. Maybe, but that was an absolute pearl that stayed with me since.
And that's, I mean, it can't really be that. I think I do have a weirder anecdote from the phones, which is when I was on the Scottish Widows help desk way back, kind of phone, what you call them, call centre, way back, and you used to have these big billboards at Heathrow with a picture of whichever widow it was at the time, and a businessman got into Heathrow late at night and gave us a call and asked for the widow to visit him in his hotel room. Shortly after, to which sadly, we had no way of taking credit card numbers. Otherwise, I was all for taking a credit card number, charging it for a couple of grand and saying, no problem, she'll be there in an hour and a half, just to see what would happen.
And the three numbers on the back of your card.
Absolutely. So that would have been good, but sadly I had to tell him that really wasn't the story. But that was the what happened on midnight shifts at call centers. So there we go. So listen, 20 years at it, and so we've been through all the professionals and stuff and whatever. And you made a funny joke there about we've probably not come very far. And well done on the Joy Division. Can you see it says Joy Division as you lift it up? That's it's not by accident, is it, Phil?
I'm going to dribble it down. Stop now, trying to read it.
So a lot of water under the bridge there. Genuinely, do you think things have changed a lot? Do you think it's better? Because I think a lot of us probably of a certain demographic cut our teeth in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s. I don't know. I can't decide. I'm writing a thing at the moment, and one of the tenets of it is that RDR didn't achieve what it was trying to achieve. But I'm not sure if I really believe it yet. So what do you think?
There's I mean, there are some improvements in there. There's a lot of backslapping. Aren't we great as an industry? Let's have an argument about whether we're professional or not. But to my mind, from what I see, there's still as much filth and grubbiness in many areas as there ever was. So a lot of the stuff's just horseshit that you hear and see read. I mean, some of the stuff drives me mad all the time when you can see. I feel like I spent my life correcting people about the number of advisors that supposedly were in the industry as advisors in the 90s. That was like 500 million people or whatever. I mean, the reality is that in that era, people like if you were a broker consultant working for Scandia and they had a cajillion of them, and to earn your money, you had to have an agency set up. So a lot of people registered as advisors that were never advisors; they were actually just there to be paid a commission split, if you like, or a fee for the business that was written by other advisors. But I think when RDR came along, my one sort of observation, it was more around the kind of crackdown on inducements and some of the money that was exchanging hands. At that point in time, when it resurrected the kind of concept of ties and multi-ties. For those of us that remember, CP121 seems to remember was the big document. There's a lot of people that run the industry in the background, and I use the industry correctly, I think, in these circumstances, and distribution as opposed to advice that rub their hands with glee at these various moments in time, because it's an opportunity to basically take control of how distribution works and charge fee. So it acts as a gatekeeper, and it's a damn sight easier to get money out of financial institutions for access to advice or for advisors and things like that, which they are pretty terrible at times, than it is to make money out of financial advisors who are typically, small businesses. I think the average is still around 2 advisors per firm. They don't have huge amounts of money. They want to have meetings before they sign up to everything. It's kind of hard work and all the rest of it, which is fair enough. It should be if they're handing over money for things. It's just a lot easier to go and get the big check from a product provider. And at one point in time, on the run up to RDR, it's public knowledge, Sesame were charging, I think it was about £1.3 million per tie that they were doing just to be on their panel. Which was essentially a kind of a pseudo multi-tie panel, however you want to dress it up. There were bigger ticket numbers quoted for other things and in other areas, and product offers and all sorts of stuff like that as well. When that was really clamped down on around, which was kind of came in with RDR, even though the rules haven't changed. Yeah. All that happened was you couldn't rent a firm anymore. These kind of big nationals, networks, support services as well. You had to go and buy them. So what we've seen over the course of the last, 5 years or something is a rush to buy firms to try and control and manipulate what the business flow looks like, because you can't rent them anymore. So it's still ostensibly a lot of the same people that are involved in the industry that's still striking these deals. What's happened is that they've gone underground. They're a bit more undercover. I mean, commission free as a good example. As grubby as commission was at times, and as wrong as it was, and all the rest of it, it was a sort of semi over the counter deal that we all kind of understood what was going on. A lot of the deals that came in, particularly in the early days of RDR, have kind of flipped into something different. And now the latest thing of late really has become kind of like an earn out, or if you give us X amount of business over the course of the next 4 years, then we'll give you a guaranteed buyout at the back end of it and all that sort of stuff. That's the flavour of the month, and it's just a different way of playing with money to try and influence an outcome at the back end of it. And an exit for retiring IFAs became the hottest thing to point out to people, to attract people to join at one point in time. I did a session for you at one of your DevX. I did a bit of research for once in my life rather than just blagging my way through it, and looked at the top 30 firms in the UK by size, just by number of CF30 or whatever that would call at the moment. And almost none of them had actually grown in size, but almost all of them were offering some form of a practice buyout deal, really they were just hanging on. Yeah, they're not really growing through. They're just hanging on to what they've got. And SJP do a very good job of recycling the money in where the invested funds by buying them off somebody and then selling them on to a younger advisor that needs to buy a client bank and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's sort of that it's changed shape, if you like, as opposed to being any kind of massive leap forward. I think there's a lot of good stuff that comes through now. And personally, I still like the relatively small independent sector that there is out there. That's where I still see a lot of the good work going on, and a lot of improvements being made, and generally a cleaning up of it. I worry a little bit at times with some of the newer guys that have come into the industry, partly because they've never. There's two reasons. One, they've never had any kind of formal training at times. It's something I've been banging on for ages. That they'll go into a firm, and some of the firms out there are brilliant at training up and bringing people through. Some of them are just absolutely shite at it. And at times ring up and go, the problem is, you bring these people in and then they just leave, and like that's because you treat them like dog shit, to be honest with you. You do nothing with them. However, that lack of formal training sometimes, the quality of advice that I've seen on occasions has not been great. But because they're steeped in behavioural finance or something like that, I think it's taken the attention away on occasions from the technical skills and requirements in there. And the other issue is that they've never seen some of these dodgy deals, because a lot of them have been washed out of the industry. And some of the kind of shiny new people in real kind of leadership positions, I've had to sort of jump on them to stop them from signing really dodgy deals, because they've just not seen what was wrong with it, because they've never been through that whole thought process and gone, you don't realise that this is bad for your clients. This is a bad outcome overall. You've just seen a check basically and gone, well, that seems fine, because they've never been through this whole process of dirt and filth and all the rest of it that there is out there. I mean, as bad as it is for us, the advisors that I kind of have the most fun with at the time are the ones that you can chat through. You can talk about all this sort of stuff, and you develop a bit of a moral compass, for want of a better word, from having seen all the dodgy stuff that's gone on in the past.
Yeah, I got in a bit of hot water. I don't know if you were there actually. I think it was a Next Gen conference a year or two ago, and it's the idea that there's a cohort coming through for whom financial planning as a profession, which is worth dwelling on a little bit, is up here, and there's this really, really boring stuff you don't need to worry about over here, which is the regulated bit where all the products and all that kind of stuff happen, and that's kind of beneath you, right? You spend no time on that if you can possibly avoid it. You spend all your time up here, and my contention there, mainly just for spoiling for a fight, to be honest, I was in a bad mood that day, was the second you take your eye off this stuff over here, the bad actors, we would call them now, come back, right? And they make products that have the superficial kind of smack of kind of respectability about them. Yeah. And God knows I built a few in my time, right? But you can't stop watching for a minute. You need to keep that side of it there. So this kind of rise of you called it shiny, I think, the shinier end of stuff. Do you think is it a kind of positive force in the sector? Is it a distraction? Is it toxic? What do you reckon?
I think it can be good as long as it's as long as people listen a bit and there's a bit of balance to it as well. There are some great young advisors coming through the ranks. Some of them though are just deluded. You kind of see some of the stuff some of the content that they post on social media and things like that. I just find myself shaking my head thinking, you have no idea what you're actually, when it comes down to it, sometimes people need somebody with a degree of technical expertise to sort out their pension or some message transfer or something like that for it. My fear is at times I've found some of these guys dabbling in the technical side of things, having a guess at it, probably posting something in a WhatsApp group to ask some other people about it, where I'm kind of like, you're not really getting the right sort of support and help that you need along the way for it. And it's a lack of experience. And, there's a bit of running before they can walk. So it helps to basically work within a firm with a framework, with the right kind of guidance and the right kind of structure, so you see what good looks like, rather than try and strike out and go it alone too early on. And some of them basically just have some of them have failed the way into a position where they're running their own business because they haven't been able to attract enough clients in other areas, or they've been put under pressure, or there's issues around it. And the barrier, regardless of what people tell you, the barrier to entry to become a financial advisor in the UK is still relatively low. You need to meet your capital adequacy requirement. What you're talking, 10, 15, 20 grand or something like that in the bank. You need a laptop, you need an internet connection, you need your qualifications, which you've probably got all of those sorts of things anyway. And you need to get up and running to trade as a firm and things like that. It's still not that difficult to do it. But I think that sometimes they'll ask for guidance and support from people who will nod and be positive and say, yeah, that's great, you go for it, as opposed to people that will basically give them a bit of have a firm word with them and put them right when they need that. So that's my kind of thing. That I think there's a need for people at times to sort of deal with some of the grunt work and apply themselves. You look at the financial literacy of a lot of them as well, and just advisors generally as well. That there's not a lot of interest in learning how their own accounts work and running it as a business, if you like. And I kind of get that, but one way or another, you're running your own business, so you need to get involved in some of the detail and some of the boring stuff, if you like. And I think that's where I'm coming from. It's sometimes life and running a business involves boring things like contracts and reading contracts and looking at your accounts and making difficult decisions to say, I'm really sorry, but I can't afford to give you a pay rise, or I can't afford X, Y, and Z along the way. And there's an experience element to running a business that not everyone's equipped for either.
So I was on a call earlier today with a bunch of folk, and the session was about rebuilding trust in financial services, right? And it was pretty, it was interesting stuff. And there was a guy on there. I'll spare him the blushes, but his thing is trying to build a group of people who don't give financial advice but only do financial planning and hand off the financial advice to someone else, so you get that real formal split between the two disciplines or practices or whatever you call it. So is that a way forward? So these guys that you're talking about that maybe shouldn't be dabbling with the pension stuff can really just hand it over?
I get that, but none of them will make it. You look at the number of people that purport to offer that, but end up making most of their money by selling courses to other financial advisors on how to do it themselves. I mean, it's just a real trend at the moment of financial advisors or coaches, or whether they're regulated or not, running seminars on. The finger can easily be pointed at me. So you've made a living out telling people what to do and stuff like that. If you've got, but I've got nothing better to do. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't purport to know what the hell to do when I'm sat in front of a client at all like that. But I think the issue for them is it's a nice idea, but I just don't see many people or enough people paying for it. That means you can make a full-time living out of it and scale it into a proper business. I mean, the number of good quality consultants and people like that in financial services that work for advisors, there's a few of them out there, but there isn't that many, because there's just not that many advisors that are prepared to pay for that sort of stuff. You eventually burn out in it. I think it's the same with some of these groups as well. Unregulated people offering financial planning, you're like, that's great, can you sort my pension out now? And then you got, well, I can't do that, so I've got to hand it over to somewhere else. So if you look at what Vanguard might do if they replicated the UK side of things, for example, it's all under one house. Most people start off possibly thinking, I need to sort out my pension or an ISA or something like that. Then it gets shifted into a bit of financial planning, and then it can get moved back into sort of the product solution and advice as well. I think if you've got somebody that's physically separate, just doing one thing and then pointing to somebody else, it might make a living. It might make you might be able to run a small business for the odd person out there that does it well. I just don't think it's a kind of a big scalable model, if I'm honest with you.
So Nick Arbin, hi Nick, makes a point there that if you were doing that, I think he's backing you up here. The receiving advisor would have to check the plan anyway to see it was right. So they might as well do the planning as well.
what you're going to get is somebody go, oh, if I want to introduce it, I'm a purist financial planner, and I don't do the regulated stuff, so I only want to introduce it to somebody else who's a purist financial planner, and you just end up, there's just too much overlap. For years, I've had people say, well, can I have somebody that's non-regulated that does X, Y, and Z of the fact find? Yeah, if it's just hard fact stuff, what's your national insurance number, all that kind of crap, fine. But as soon as you get into some of the questions that you need to do, around risk and about, it's just too easy to fall into it. And unless you've got a very bespoke model set up to do it, then why bother? Plenty of advisors out there are quite happy, would rather do the financial planning element and get a paraplanner or somebody internally to do some of the more technical aspects. Why would they want to buddy up with somebody who does the fun bit and kind of, it effectively makes that person a paraplanner in their own right, background.
So are you arguing then that in terms of, I'm not sure how much all the social stuff and all the kind of discourse in the trades and all that kind of stuff matters in this regard? Maybe it does a bit, but I guess it's mood music and national journalists and stuff pick up on this stuff and whatever. But are you arguing for the kind of traditional skills of an advisor, that is to say construction of financial shit that makes money move in certain ways that suits you for whatever your tax situation is or whatever, to kind of rehabilitate that a bit, to make it a bit better valued, rather than saying that's all the dirty boring stuff, what we want to know is your hopes, your dreams and your aspirations, and give you a hug?
Don't get me wrong, the planning part of it's really important. If I to go out and pick the right sort of financial advisor, in my opinion, you want somebody who's got a foundation in the actual grunt work of financial advice, and then somebody who does the financial planning very well on top of that. So you're almost looking for someone that's got a foundation in the technical aspects of it, that then wants to develop themselves into more of the soft skills and those elements. My fear is that there's people out there potentially that are ignoring that basic foundation. There's a load of young advisors right now that ask about wills. They don't ask about any of that sort of stuff. And I know for a fact, because it comes through loud and clear from a lot of the business owners that I talk to, because they never did that FPC style. You do this, you do that. There isn't that learning things by rote so much anymore, and the exams are detailed but quite fragmented in some respects as well. So it's just that base layer where you kind of go, right, I know all the fundamentals, and now I'm going to start doing the extra stuff on top, which is where people will say that's where all the value is, and I don't disagree, but that's about where the value is perceived as well. I just don't see the point in going straight to somebody, either employing someone to do that top level and nothing else, unless you've got that, certainly in a different firm. And I don't see the point in having going to a non-regulated person and then getting introduced across to a regulated firm and all the rest of it. It smacks to me of something's gone wrong along the way. Why is this arrangement? Because you could go to any of hundreds of financial planning businesses and get the whole lot under one roof. It's it's surely a much slicker experience doing it that way.
All right, that's really interesting. I got a couple of comments coming in, which I'll read out and ask you about. I'd also quite like people who think Phil is absolutely full of shit about all that stuff to respond to the chat as well, because I'm sure there's bound to be at least 0.5 of you.
My wife's not listening at the moment, but I'm sure if she does, she'll be more than happy to tip in. So,
I have no doubt. So Paul, hey Paul, so he's got a suggestion. So to help with FSCS levies, he suggests, so if we regulated products much more tightly than we do, could we free advice on the basis that I guess you would design out potentially toxic products by having them even more tightly regulated than they are right now?
I don't have a fixed view on how you deal with this particular issue. I think my own thinking around it. I spoke to the FCA a few years ago about this as well. The one thing that I will say that really knocked me off was, at the time, the whole advice side of the industry was lobbying about the long stop, which was a total and utter waste of everyone's time and energy. Virtually no claims come through. Outside of a 15-year limit, it was an entirely ego-driven principle. Nobody should have given two shits about it, and every single ounce of lobbying energy went into that. At the top point, I was saying it's about the FSCS levy. You need to get that reformed. The other thing I will say is that the FSCS did get reformed in 2018, and 25% of the levy is paid by product providers, which everyone seems to have completely forgotten. So it will be 25% more if it hadn't at that point in time. So that said, it's not an ideal situation, I accept. The problem with the product levy is you're asking the regulated or anybody else to try and make a guess as to what's a problem product and what isn't. And you're also saying to a client, you're going to pay more, presumably, for the product itself, even though it's the advice that would be flawed. You're going to pay more for the product because you're going into a high. So you're basically asking someone to self-insure one way or another by doing it that way. You can argue you're doing that by going to the advice firm. The advice firm's going to increase their own fees, but ultimately, we're kind of heading back to a world where advisors at times say, oh, it's all about the advice, not the product, and then say, but as far as this is concerned, this particular fee that we don't want to pay, it's about the product rather than the advice. So I still think it's fraught with problems at the time. My own preference, and this was difficult to implement, but was to have some kind of a risk-based way of assessing firms in the market, and having some way of them paying, proportionate to the advice risk that they pose, as opposed to necessarily just the product itself. So they can take a view as to whether they want to absorb the cost or pay it themselves for it. So, but there's got to be a way around it. Every single option that's up on the table, when I looked at it years ago, and I haven't really looked in any great detail of has had its own flaws. So you're picking your poison. I think as a result of that, the FCA's approach to some extent is solid. That's they're just tinkering with it rather than doing anything too radical.
Okay, so I'm going to Simon, you've asked a great question. I'm going to come back to it in just a second. But Russ, your old, not old colleague, you're aged Russ. You're extremely youthful.
Move on.
So, what is, if we're talking about stuff going wrong and stuff? What's the next big scandal that you see? And earlier up, Russ asked about your best birthday gifts as well. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about those?
No, I think he's just angling after anything that he got me at some point in time. None of them feature really on the list, to be honest with you. I once got into a lot of trouble because I bought him an inflatable sheep for his birthday. And the people in the office, this was in the first job that I was still basically living as students. I got the kitty to go and buy him something and thought that this, effectively a sex toy, was hilarious, and absolutely nobody else did whatsoever. But there you go. Whether Russell still has that sex toy in his house, maybe you can answer, is on there now.
Maybe he can. But next big scandal, is it the consolidators? Is it the fact that this is just a kind of merry-go-round of money? Does the private equity stuff dry up? Does it disappear at the sector? Do people fold up, or does something else blow up? What do you reckon?
It's hard. I've said beforehand that the DB transfers and stuff like that would blow up. I'm kind of strangely a bit more relaxed about it because it's been so hyped so far, and that it almost couldn't be as bad as it's likely to be at this point in time. So we'll have to wait and see. There's bits and pieces around the fact that so much money, as you say, is flooded into financial advice and buying certain businesses and stuff like that. We've seen quite a lot of. There's been a lot of wrist slaps so far about churning, to all intents and purposes, restricted advice firms that basically, forcing people to move money into their own in-house products and funds and all that sort of stuff. My suspicion is that that's tamed quite a lot of the wild excesses out there for the time being. But I've had speak to various people of late. I mean, the Sense deal has been announced sort of recently. I think it was on Monday. We had plenty of offers for Sense beforehand, and predominantly, and a lot of them, the conversation went, "We'll offer you. Here's a very big number, bigger than the number that Sense was sold for, but 50% of it is contingent entirely on you turfing money into our in-house funds or converting. It's just that even the worst one way, just the number of advisors that you convert to being restricted. I was like, on one conversation I had, I was like, you do realise you can't do that anymore, and said, tell you what, that's exactly why we need you involved in this deal, Phil, to make sure that we don't get into trouble through dodgy offers like the one that I've just made. It's pretty brazen. All that's happened, it's another example of what's happened over the course of the past 5, maybe 10 years, is we've become a lot better at creating a fake paper trail to cover our tracks for all of the stuff that was dodgy stuff still goes on. We just got a lot better at hiding it. I mean, it took the FCA or the FSA, as it possibly was at the time, a long time to get to Sesame before they actually eventually stopped them and fined them. And yet all of these deals were out in the open, and lawyers were paid a lot of money to dress up the paperwork. It used to be able to get away with this stuff if it was for an IT development. And some of there must have been some like flux capacitors invented or time machine travel for the amount of money that's been spent by some of these networks and nationals in particular, and support service providers. And the money that's exchanged hands over the years, you'd expect the industry and certainly the technology side of things to be demonstrably less shit than it actually is at the moment. You look at it, this is not an industry that's had tens and tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds pumped into it to make it slicker and more efficient for advisors. So all of that stuff still goes on. Maybe there'll be another way where that gets exposed or something happens with it, but I honestly don't know at this point in time. A lot of the scandals seem to be around stuff that arguably doesn't involve advisors at all. Things on the perimeter, things that shouldn't really be. The things that worry me the most are things that shouldn't be regulated, but are pseudo-regulated. Look at peer-to-peer lending. Firms are authorised, but there's no real regulation that goes on there. You look at all of these other similar sort of peripheral products that advisors typically don't go near or could do. Those are the things that I think there's going to be ongoing issues with mini bonds and all this sort of stuff, because there's some bad people involved in them, and they use the FCA authorization as a veneer of respectability. And people, and it almost always ends up in tears. Forex trading, stuff like that as well. And there's a lot of money going through. There's a lot of quick bucks to be made by setting up one of these businesses, popping up, and the individuals involved. There's a guy, Philip Nunn, which Mr. Morrow can see on there, is a big fan of, and he's popped up at about 3 different firms in recent times. He's an absolute classic kind of LinkedIn wanker, with a CV of I've done everything and an entrepreneur, and is a book I've written and all that stuff. He's basically a con man that seems to have successfully moved from one place to the next. It got found out after a while, but he's driving a very nice car and living in a very nice house, no doubt. So it works. We should do it.
I don't know. I'm just looking down here, phoning our lawyer about you being on. I think he meant allegedly, or maybe actually.
It's true. Truth is a defence to defamation. So
yeah. So listen, Paul says, unsurprisingly, Phil's a bit grumpy, and is there anything positive out there? And that's a chance to bring in this question from Simon, and then I think we should talk about Berry for a little while. So from Simon, he's saying, where's the growth? Is it in smaller firms? Do you think? I mean, I've just always thought that advice at scale is either a group of small firms all running around doing their own things, completely uncontrollable. And I had to pay some of those marketing packages way back in the day from being provider side. And it was my observation that most of the networks couldn't tell, advisor firms what to have for breakfast, let alone where to allocate their money. Is it that end of things, or do these big firms outside of maybe SJP or someone like that, is it TP and those guys? Is it the boutique end? Where is the best prospects?
Some of them aren't as big as they make out, so some of these firms aren't aren't huge, even though you think that they are. I think it's sort of polarized reasonably at the moment. You've got very big firms which will carry on being very big, but most of them have grown through acquisition in reality. If you look at a lot of these bigger firms, particularly the kind of nationals and the networks, no one's ever woken up and gone, I really want to work for this business as an advisor before. If you've got a mature advice firm, you don't typically go in there. You go in there because there's some sort of an exit offered. It's almost a stepping stone to retirement, or you've gone in there in the first place because you're a new startup business. You don't have any clients, and you need to go in there. And SJP have done a really good job with their academy and all those sorts of things in there. So I think a lot of the big ones will persist and will carry on thriving in future. But I also think there's always a tipping point where, in my 360 days, we used to pick up loads of firms that were just spilling out because of acquisitions, advisors splintering, setting up their own business, wanting to do all the rest of it. And, so there's always been quite a good spill out of people out of those sorts of larger firms that want to go their own way and want to do their own thing. That's what I like about the advice sector. In as much as I can be miserable about it at times, would you believe? It's just a real broad range of people. That's what's great about it, and it's why at times it drives me mad. It's why at times some of the people that I like the most that I've ever met anywhere are financial advisors, or in the financial services sector. If you look at lawyers, for example, or accountants, it's quite a homogenous group of people. They've all come from a similar background, similar qualifications. It's quite samey. It's not a bad thing, but it's not as interesting as dealing with a bunch of financial advisors, because you just get all sorts. And I don't think any of that's going to change. I've looked at the numbers over the years. They've not really changed that much. The shape of it's not changed that much. There's some big firms that eventually get so big, it splinters. It throws off a bunch of people that want to set up a 3-man band firm, and so it goes on. And then they get sold, and it all happens all over again.
And it rolls on. Listen, if we were like professional nonsense talkers, we would now be able to pivot seamlessly into your work with setting up or resetting up Bury Football Club and draw parallels and comparisons from financial services to the business of football management. So could you just do that for a few minutes? That'd be all right.
There are a few parallels in some respects with it, and it's been a bit of an eye opener.
Some people might not know, by the way. I know it's inconceivable to you that some people aren't interested in Bury Football Club, but
I'm getting to that. So, the original club, Bury Football Club, was taken over by a maniac in about 6 or 7 years ago, who basically it's dubbed as being extremely complicated and lots of financial complexities around it. The reality is he just borrowed a load of other people's money through a company, so he had no skin in the game personally. A lot of it was on the peer-to-peer lending website Lendy, which subsequently went bust, unsurprisingly. So Lendy gave him a load of money. He got it from all sorts of other different sources. We eventually went into meltdown, brought in a guy that bought it for £1, and he's ostensibly an asset stripper, and he still owns the club now. If you want to go and have a look at the comedy scribblings of Steve Dale and Madman, go and have a look at Bury FC's website, because it still actually just about exists, with a lot of players that aren't there anymore and stuff like that. It doesn't play football anymore, which is an important point that some people seem to miss out on. So me and a bunch of fans basically set up our own football club from scratch, which seemed to be completely impossible. At no point did anybody believe that was actually possible, because one of the comments that haunts me to this day from one of the local MPs was that they said that I met the people that set up AFC Wimbledon and some of the other clubs, and there just isn't the same quality of person in Bury. I was like, right, that's getting pinned up on in the virtual dressing room, so to speak. So we're up and running. We've started to play some friendlies. We've got a league position that's starting next year, but I've structured it with the other guys as well, and with the help of an organisation called the Football Supporters Association. as what's called a community benefit society. So that the fan ownership. This was the interesting bit for me. I was like, how do you have something that's owned by its members without having a crap load of administration and stuff to sort out? Wimbledon, for example, had a guy who was, I think he was one of the senior partners at Deloitte, or one of the top firms that was behind the scenes pulling it together. And he launched the club as a PLC, which I have very little interest in going through that exercise. But a community benefit society is basically, it sits somewhere between a charity and a mutual society. So it's owned by its members. You pay a subscription in. There's other types of share issue that can do if you want to, due course. But for £5 a month, basically you become a full voting member. It's not a redeemable share that you get, so you can't sell it elsewhere. And we've got probably about, when all the latest direct debits clear, I suspect we've probably got about 1,100 members now paying £60 a year, £5 a month. And it's rising all the time. We've got some lovely sponsors. Mr. Morrow on there will be, it keeps asking probing questions to get a mention for open money on it.
Are open money sponsoring the shirts?
Yeah, you may have observed this.
Yeah.
This comment. And it's all working really well. But it's fascinating thing because we've done most of this during lockdown, so it's been really difficult. There's just tons of arguments. Yeah, football fans are a real cross section of the whole of society. I've got people on the audit and finance committee that are far brighter than I am, far more experienced in a lot of areas than I am. And you've got people that I got an email this morning from a guy. We had a friendly. We start to do live streams now. The technology side of things and the social media is really good. So we had a friendly on Monday night against a team called Walshaw. So I had an email in this morning saying, when can I pay to get the live stream against Walsall? So there's also that sort of stuff that I have to deal with a little bit from time to time and think, how do I respond to this stuff? Like, away.
Do what I want to do for the Widows guy and take his credit card number, and
Yeah, I will do. I will do anyway. Yeah. And then the 3 numbers on the back.
There it is. Steve makes a hilarious football joke, which I think is based on the fact he supports Dunfermline.
There's a little link to the Lancat there as well. Steve's a Dunfermline fan, just to try and explain his bizarre reference there. Dunfermline's chairman, who did the deal to get external investment from them Germans in, is Ross MacArthur, who used to be one of the partners at 360 before we sold the company and all the rest of it as well there. So clearly, Russell, the question for you is, who the hell are you gonna chair? Where's your football team? What's the matter with you, man?
And is it true, asked Paul, that Messi is on his way to Bury Football Club?
There's one guy that looks a bit like Lionel Messi that we signed, and I'm on Twitter. I'm largely sick of people saying it's Lionel Messi, innit? Football fans have no shame. I've discovered as well for repeating endlessly the same joke over and over and over again ad nauseum, regardless of how many other people have made the same joke beforehand. But I forgive you, Paul. I don't want to expect you to be watching it.
And bringing it together beautifully, John just asked, and I think, John, you've just given us our ideal out from this session that will not die. The technical side of this kind of stuff, can we create a double-geared offshore special purpose vehicle to invest in the shares of Bury Football Club?
I'm pretty sure you can do top slicing into an offshore, into a community share, and not have to worry about any tax implications.
And in about 15 years' time, some financial advisor is going to phone his support service and says, "Can you remember why I sold my mother an offshore bond that invests in this football club?"
Yeah.
And round we go again. Thank you, everybody, for being on. Thank you, Phil, for sharing your always inspiring and uplifting view of the world. I told you it'd be Doer and Northern, and none the worse for it. I thought it was great.
It is Furrow and Ball paint, by the way.
Oh, yeah, Pam wanted to know. Is it like Elephant's Breath? That's my favourite Farrow and Ball
name. I don't remember what it is. I think it's Farrow and Ball.
Of course it is. Where do you live? Didsbury, right?
Didsbury, yeah.
Yeah, of course it's Farrow and Ball. That's the only thing they sell around there.
So there you go, Pam. Maybe find out later on. Anyway, thank you, everybody. We'll be back next week. It's our 10th birthday next week, so we're going to do a thing about that. But do come and see us anyway. Till then, behave yourselves if you feel like it. No more than 6 in a bed as of Monday. Line cat out.